Okay, let's have a look at the second part of the SAT sample, viewing member records. We access that in the main form through the View Members menu tool strip. And what we'll do is we'll actually create a new form and load it through there. So let's go and create a new form first. So add Windows form, and let's call it View Members form. Okay, and all the View Members form is going to be pretty simple. It'll contain a data grid. So we're going to do a bit of formatting, but it will use a data grid, which works a bit like a dynamic Excel spreadsheet. We're going to load the data into there. But before we do, let's stick a panel in to help organize our stuff. Where are we? So here we are. Here's a panel in containers. Put a panel in there, and you can click the little expand arrow there, and it says doc and parent container. So now what that means is that when we expand the window, then that container will expand with us. We're also going to stick a data grid in there, a DataGridView. Let's put a DataGridView in there. And we're going to do the same thing, dock that in the parent container. All right, and we'll have to add some columns to that. We'll actually do the formatting of the data grid in the visual editor, and then we'll load the data in when we actually run this form. So, but because this is going to be a view-only form, let's disable editing, adding, and deleting. And then we're going to add some columns. So here we go. Let's add some columns here. Column 1, leave that, but name of that. But let's change this to, we want to show display name. And it's going to be visible and read only, add. And column 2 will be house. I forgot what data we have in here. That'll do. Read only. So if we just show those two pieces of data and close that. So now we've got the two columns. And what we want to do is let's edit those columns and select the name one, and we'll set the layout of that so that it auto resizes. So we'll actually fill. You can have a fill weight so that if the weights are equal, then if I put that both at 100, then it will fill out as much as it possibly can. And we'll do the same with the house. We'll set the auto size mode to be fill. There we go. Okay, cool. So there's our form. Now if we come back into our form1.cs and find the members tool strip for the members menu item. So if you go back into here, and there we are, double click on that, that'll take you to the right one. And we're going to just display the view members form. Okay, so same as we did before, let's just create a form object, and we'll call it view members form, and we're going to be setting that to an instance, or a new instance of view members form. There it is there, and we'll show that as a modal dialog as well, same as we did in the other one. So it's going to be view members form. Make sure you get the instance of it, not the class itself. And we're going to show as a dialog window. So there we go. So if we just run that, and let's see what we've got so far. Lots of errors in this, I've been hacking around it. So under the view members, right, and there's our thing. Now if we expand it, you can see that the data grid expands as well. So close that down. And I probably should have set this form so that it expanded fully. I probably should do that. So I've come back in my Form 1 design, and I come down here and set that so that, where are we? There's my window. Should be able to set that. Oh, look, I'll find that later. I'm not sure where that's gone. But I can set that so that it actually automatically resizes to the size of the window. Should be Windows size. I can't find it there though. So anyway, layout. No, doesn't matter. Deal with that later. But anyway, so now let's go to our view members form, and we're actually going to double click on the top of the form here, and this will bring up the view members load. So the deal is that in the initialize, we'll read the CSV file, and put all the components into a record. Let's, if we can't save the record up here in the namespace, SAT data access, we'll be able to access it throughout the entire application. So let's just create a member record. So it's just a struct record, and it's going to have a few public variables and public fields in there. So string name first. Actually, that should be public, shouldn't it? Otherwise, we're not going to be able to access that. Public string name last. Now, we may not need these all at the same time, but it makes sense to open the file, read all the data, and then close it down, string, and store all the data in these records. Display name, public string, and you can put any data that you think is appropriate to your application. There we go. So cool. Now what we'll need to do is read the CSV file, store each member record in a data structure. Now it's probably, we may as well do that while we're setting up here. We'll need to have a data structure that copes with a variable number of items. So rather than use an array, I'm going to use a list. And as I said before, a list is a parameterized type, so you need to tell it what kind of data we're going to store in there. So I'm going to do a member record. So I'm going to create a list of member records, and I call it, let's call it records, member records. And that's just going to be set to a new, there we are. Right, get used to the syntax of that. So remember, a list is an array that actually dynamically resizes itself as it needs to. Because arrays are, once you create an array, it's a fixed size. Okay, we're going to do some file I/O, so we need to add the system, I beg your pardon, using system.io, as we've done before. Read the file. Okay, well that's pretty easy. We know that when I read, if I use the file dot read all lines, that I need a file path, and it's going to return me an array of strings. So we're going to create a file path. File path. I can't, what is the file path of this? I think it was members. I think it's members.csv from memory. So I'm going to give it that. There we are. I could just put that string straight into there, but it's more useful if you've got it at the top, just in case you're going to do more than one read operation. And I need to create an array of strings to capture the data. So just call it lines. So we've been through this before, but that will store each line, each record. Remember, each line of data in my CSV file represents a member record, so it's going to store it into those. So now, actually I probably should put this in a method, shouldn't I? So let's create a record, let's create a void new method, read data file, and I'm going to put that all in here. Right, so what I need to do now is parse each of those lines. So for int I equals 0, I've got to step through each of my lines. I is less than lines dot length I plus plus. So it's just an iteration. We're going to iterate through each one of the lines, and then I'm going to get a string. Just call it line equals lines I. There we go. Cool. Now we've got to actually parse that line. We've got to pull the line apart, because we know our file type is stored like this. Name first, pipe character, name last, pipe character, display name, pipe character, and then house. So I want to split that line using a pipe character as a separator. So I've got to go and create a char array. Just remember, char array, I'm just going to call it separator, if I can spell it, equals, and it's just an array that contains one character, which is the pipe. So that's all we're going to split it on. Could give it more, but that'll do for us. So I want to split that, so I'm going to use the split function. So it's just line dot split. Now split requires an array of characters that I'm going to split on, so I'm just going to give it that separator one. Separator. And it will give me back an array of strings. Let's call it line items. Oops. It's got to be an array. And that will populate, so this will populate each one of these in turn. Oops, that's a string. I'm sorry, it's got to be a character, not a string. There we go. Right, so if I run that, spelling is atrocious. Okay, so if I run that now, and let's put a breakpoint there, we should actually see this working. So view members, oops, no, what happened there? I didn't call read data files. Okay, so under my initialize component, I'm actually going to call the message, call the function itself. Okay. All right, so this time, all things being equal. Okay, so there's my lines. So it's read 5 strings, and there are my list of Swedish names or Finnish names and their houses and things like that. So now it's gone and got the first line from that line. So each of the lines, it's got my first line from there, and then it split that into these items, into 4 items. First name, last name, display name, and house. There you go. All right, cool. Now what I need to do is actually create a record and store that in a record. So let's do that. So member record, the record equals new member record. Now I've got to pull apart my line items and stick each item into there. So the record dot display name. Oh, let's do it in order. Name first. And name first is actually in line items 0. All right. So it's going and getting that one and putting it into there. So now the record dot name last equals line items 1. Because this is the way we've designed our CSV file. The record dot display name equals line items 2. And then finally the record dot house equals line items 3. So that should create a record and pack it for us. Now we want to actually record all of those records into our member records. So I'm just going to push that member records dot add. There it is there. It's add method and the record. So that stores it into our member records array. So if I run that again, Okay, so I should have a member records has now got one item in it, and there it is there. There's the display name, house, first name, last name. Alright, I'm not sure that's in the right order. I think that's last name and first name. I'm looking at that because that should be last name, first name. So I think, looking at that, our data file goes this way. Alright, and so that'll be name equals 1 and equals 0. I might just reorder that just to keep it consistent. Alright, there we go. Keep your code neat. Alright, cool, that works. Alright, so what we want to do now is actually populate our grid view. And we're going to do that in the form load. Populate the data grid view. Now I don't think I named the data grid view, but the way a data grid view works is data grid view 1. What we do is we can items, oh I beg your pardon, it's rows, isn't it? I forgot rows. Data grid view has a series of rows in it. Right, and to each row you can add an item. But adding an item requires, it wants to, there are 4 possible options. We're going to use this one. We're going to use an array of objects. And we're going to give it an array of strings, and it's going to push those across. Now, we want 2 items in our string array. We want display name and house. So what I've got to do is actually go and unpack my members' records and extract the data. So for int I equals 0, and this is not the only way to do it, give you that, but I is less than member records dot, doesn't use length, it uses count I plus plus. Alright, so what we'll do is, let's alright, so there's our for loop that's going to run through there. I'm going to get rid of that for the moment, make it easier. So I've got to unpack that record, so I'm going to just do member record, not records, member record, the record, just reversing the process that I used before, equals member records I. Go and get the ith one. So it iterates through each of these, loops through and gets each record in turn. Then we've got to unpack the record. I'm actually going to create a string. Now my string's going to look like for, or actually it's an array, isn't it? So I'm going to pack an array. So let's just do string array, let's call it row with the correct spelling. And that's going to be equal to this. I'm going to give it the record dot display name, comma, to populate an array. It's like set notation in maths. You use the curly brackets and you give it the items one after the other. The record, the other one we want is house. Okay, there we go. Alright, so there's my row that I'm going to push into the database. So now data into DataGrid, DataGridView dot rows, oops, dot add, and I'm going to give it the row that I want to add, and it will add those underneath our 2 row headings. And that should pretty much be it. So let's just run through that and see if that actually, better stop that, start it again, and let's see what happens now. So view, members, alright, so that's going to load through those, I'm going to get rid of that breakpoint, continue, and there we go, there's our 5 display names and the houses, and if I expand that, it expands out. Okay, so that's pretty simple. I mean, data grid views you can format a lot more, in a much more involved way than that. You'll notice that these are, you can't edit them, you can select them, but we could make it so that if you double click on it, it expands it, but we'll look at that in the next one. Okay, so that's having a look at data grid views, so you can now add and view members. Cheers.